Resident Evil has enjoyed immense popularity over the years for quite a few reasons, and let's face it, Umbrella's Tyrants are one of the biggest. The concept of a bioweapon is not exactly groundbreaking, and in many such cases, it's not always been received well either. However, the Tyrant Project was executed with such brilliance that it has almost single-handedly made Resident Evil into what it is today. And sure, they didn't get it right at once, but many fascinating and terrifying models later, they did come up with Tyrants like the Nemesis-T Type, which really needs no introduction. Ultimately, from the conception of the project to its execution and numerous revisions, Umbrella gave us a whole horde of Tyrants, each more formidable than the last, and it made the franchise more interesting and challenging as a result. That being said, it can get a little confusing at times, even for seasoned fans, keeping up with all the exact features and timelines of the different Tyrant models. Well, we're not here to judge at all. In fact, in this video, we'll be exploring the entire project starting with its inception, and we'll be taking a look at all the models in detail. Before we get too far ahead of ourselves though, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. How did the Tyrant Project begin? The original intention behind the Tyrant Project was the creation of an advanced bioorganic weapon for military purposes. The beginning can be traced back to 1988. The T-virus's most typical effect was necrotizing brain matter, which naturally gave limited results in the early BOW experiments. The projects Cerberus and Hunter were the only successful ones, and consequently, Umbrella USA and Umbrella Europe decided to focus on alternative research. The former focused more on the physical prowess of the BOWs, while the latter was more concerned with preserving intelligence. In theory, the Tyrant Project would have bridged this gap by creating a bioweapon with near-human intelligence, or at least something close to it. This would allow for the creation of the ultimate bioweapon that could interpret and follow a range of commands and also be incredibly strong. At Arclay Laboratory, the research personnel found out that in order to get these results, the mutations would require the test subject to possess certain genes relating to intelligence, as these could change the way the T-virus normally interacted with a human's DNA. However, there was a pitfall. Such people were statistically very uncommon, maybe 1 in 10 million. As a result, this route wasn't practical, and the T-virus had to be genetically engineered to create a new strain that would allow for a wider field of compatible test subjects. This delayed the progress of the Tyrant Project significantly. Almost a decade later, in 1998, the Epsilon strain of the virus was produced, which finally allowed the Tyrants to enter prototype production. This new strain could cause mutations at a faster rate than before, while tremendously increasing the physical strength of the subject. Additionally, it also led to an increased chance of humans mutating into powerful entities with limited brain damage. While there was a significant improvement, there was still a drawback. The physical changes of the mutation were so quick that the test subject could die in the process. Nevertheless, a number of convicts were sent to the laboratory to be used as test subjects, and while it isn't known exactly how many there were, some numbers suggest there could have been 11 participants. Ultimately, 3 Tyrants survived: T1, T2, and T11. The Tyrant Project team would carefully inject the virus into the body parts of compatible subjects and also perform surgery where needed. This led to a successful development. The research on T1 was abandoned when it fell prey to mental degradation and skin necrosis, which the team found was a result of administering a very high dose of the T-virus. While this wasn't expected, it otherwise helped the R&D team perfect their technique while creating the next 2 Tyrants, T2 and T11. Later that year, the Arclay Laboratory experienced an outbreak of the new virus, so a cloned embryo of the T2 was developed quickly and evacuated out of the premises for further research so that the Tyrant Project would continue.
What? Premature.
How did Umbrella improve the Tyrant design? Once the Tyrant models were successfully produced, Umbrella started working to improve and perfect the design and make it more efficient. The Epsilon strain ultimately led to the start of the process of mass-producing BOWs. Most of the new Tyrants engineered after the Mansion incident were actually just modified clones of the T2, but there was also additional research and developments happening. Despite the focus on the success of the Tyrant Project, Umbrella did consider alternatives to it quite early. These included the TALOS project, which was aiming to create BOWs that could be controlled by computers and used to solve intelligence problems. In July 1998, the T-11 was evacuated from Arklay to take part in this project. Another alternative, though significantly more low cost, was the Bandersnatch project. This created human weapons from those that were not adequately genetically compatible, although the resultant creatures suffered from underdeveloped limbs and other body parts. As soon as the T2 clone embryo was evacuated from the Arklay laboratory, genetically engineering Tyrant clones began. By July 23, 1998, the first variants of the T103 Tyrants had been created. This included the standard mass production type as well as a modified version named Ivan to serve as the bodyguard of Umbrella executive Colonel Sergei Vladimir. In August of that year, the mass production of the T103 clones started on Sheena Island, along with the successor Tyrants such as Thanatos, Tyrant C, and Tyrant R in Raccoon City. Work also began on the creation of the Nemesis-T Type, which was essentially a variant of the T103 with its brain replaced by a Nemesis alpha parasite. The Nemesis project of the 1980s was another alternative to the Tyrant project, and it was developed to replace the brain of its host, which was not adequate. When a combined being was created, the efficacy of the Nemesis parasites could be tested in combat. During the outbreak of the T-virus in September in Raccoon City, Tyrants were used en masse. Around 6 standard models of the T103, Thanatos, Nemesis-T, Tyrant C, and Tyrant R were deployed in action during the outbreak. 5 of the T103s were sent to Incineration Disposal Plant P12A to deal with a Delta Force operation, and the 6th model was sent to the Raccoon Police Station to confirm the destruction of the police force, as well as to look for the Golgotha virus. The creator of Thanatos, Dr. Greg Muller, awoke the Tyrant and gave it orders to kill Umbrella mercenaries on his behalf so that his research could be protected. The orders of the Nemesis-T Type were to hunt down and kill STARS officers as well as their allies, and this was mainly to test how the parasite would fare in terms of combat against trained military personnel. While it isn't known how Tyrant C was used, Tyrant R was activated in October in order to protect the personnel of the Umbrella R&D Center from escaped Hunter Rs. However, it rebelled against authority pretty quickly when it overheard a nearby researcher had a remote that would detonate a bomb in its chest. Ultimately, all the Tyrants failed in their respective missions as they were unable to secure their objectives or were killed. Despite this, the production of the T103 model continued on Sheena Island, and by the time the outbreak of the virus reached there were 78 T103 models of the mass production variety produced there. After 1998, the research on Tyrants is sparse. A Tyrant specimen was infected with a prototype T and G virus strain called Tyrant 91. T11 was destroyed in the Caucasus laboratory in a raid in February 2003. After the fall of Umbrella, the only known use of Tyrants was in the Eastern Slav Republic in 2011. In this case, 3 from an unidentified series of the project were activated in order to wipe out a liquor incursion in a laboratory. What are the key characteristics of a Tyrant? The experiment outlines of the Tyrant Project produced 2 main types of Tyrant to serve as BOW products, the infiltration type and the combat type. The role of the former was to blend in with a given population and obtain intelligence, essentially working covert ops. They were given very heavy clothing to help this process and had a more human appearance. The combat types were intended for battle use and were usually more rugged, taller, and deformed, often naked as well. A typical effect of the T-virus infection in Tyrants is the overproduction of the human growth hormone. The shortest of the Tyrants, the T103, was close to about 7 feet in height. A later series of Tyrants produced by a third party was nearly 12 feet tall. However, this doesn't indicate that only the Tyrants experienced the height-inducing effects of the virus, since Morpheus D. Duval and Sergei Vladimir experienced a lot of height gain as well. Tyrants had the power to perform very impressive physical abilities, such as jumping several stories, flipping tanks, bursting through solid concrete, and even redirecting the path of rockets. The combat-type Tyrants had the ability for arm growth, which could result in the formation of a claw on at least one arm. The muscle strength of the Tyrants was significant enough for humans to be impaled and held up easily using these claws. However, the infiltration types were meant for covert ops and typically didn't have claws, except in cases where the power limiter was disabled, as seen with the T-78. An interesting characteristic of Tyrants, though not initially a genetic feature, was their possession of a second or even a third heart. When the T2 was created, the team at Arklay decided to graft a large animal heart to the right side of the chest of the Tyrant through a major surgical operation, and this effectively gave the creature another circulatory system. Other Tyrants were also seen with this feature, which suggests that the surgery later became standard procedure on the clones, or they were genetically engineered to grow them themselves. What is a super tyrant? All tyrants were equipped with a device called a power limiter, which was developed by Umbrella to prevent the creatures from experiencing any out-of-control mutations. Given the nature of the T-virus, there was really no saying when a tyrant would mutate further, and if that happened, whether the tyrant would still retain its utility. Consider the device a safety valve of sorts. Usually, such extra mutations happen only when the tyrant has taken severe damage and gained extra muscle mass and claws as a defense mechanism. When a tyrant would bypass its power limiter, it would become a super tyrant. This model would be more difficult to dispatch than regular tyrants, and they also lose the ability to follow or even comprehend strict orders. A super tyrant would pretty much degrade into a berserker-like state. How many different tyrant models exist? What were the experimental tyrants? Now that we've covered how the Tyrant Project came into being, let's peep into the different models that were created. However, the models covered in this video aren't indicative of the people or creatures that have the potential to become a tyrant or a tyrant-like mutation. T1, also known as the Proto-Tyrant, the T1 was essentially an experimental subject that served as a prototype for future models of tyrants. Its design was considered fairly primitive when compared to later models, but it did display a generous amount of bare ferocity, which made the whole series earn the title of Tyrant. It was created by the Arclay Laboratories Tyrant Project team to create intelligent bioweapons for military use and was the first of its series. While the team saw a lot of success with this model, they also experienced issues such as a defective nervous system, severe epidermal exfoliation, and reduced intelligence. It was determined that the T-virus injected during the initial infection was at a very high dosage, which likely caused these unintended side effects. The Tyrant did possess enormous strength, which the team was looking for. However, due to its subpar intelligence, it was considered a failure and eventually placed in storage at Nest to be disposed of later. When the Queen Leech attacked on July 24th, the T1 fought STARS officers Albert Wesker and Rebecca Chambers, as well as Billy Cohen, ex-Marine second lieutenant. Fighting it was a challenge in the truest sense of the word, but it was ultimately defeated after 3 separate encounters. It was finally destroyed when the self-destruct sequence of the Umbrella training facility ensued. As you can probably guess, the T1 was not an exceptional result, but it did lay the foundation for all the subsequent Tyrant models that followed and allowed the research team to work on their mistakes and create more formidable tyrants. The T2. The T2 was the next product of the Arclay Laboratories' endeavor to create the ultimate life form. At that point, the T2 was a well-kept secret and retained the same level of intelligence as a pre-infected human being. This was a very important development, as it would allow the Tyrant to really live up to its name, but unfortunately, it was killed. The T2 was an improvement on the previous Hunter models as well as the T1, and as such, it was the first successful Tyrant. After its completion, the T2 was planned to engage in a fight with combat veterans with live fire before its clones were mass-produced. However, the development of this model was never formally concluded, as it released the Epsilon strain as an airborne pathogen in the laboratory, infecting many researchers. This happened primarily due to the interference of the Queen Leech. As a result, no written report of the T2 was completed, and the model itself did not receive any physical improvements after the addition of an altered cardiovascular system. While the clones of the model were successfully evacuated by Albert Wesker, the T2 itself could not be evacuated during the quarantine. In July, Wesker was tasked with destroying the Tyrant during his STARS team investigation, but the T2 managed to release itself from confinement. It managed to stab Wesker and then turned to deal with the remaining members of the team, but was fortuitously knocked out. The power limiter of the T2 then was bypassed, which made it turn into a super Tyrant. This allowed it to easily force its way through the concrete walls of the laboratory and engage with the STARS forces once again on the helipad. The fight was no joke, but finally, a direct hit from a rocket launcher was able to put the Tyrant down. Granted, the T2 was not given a fate worthy of its abilities, since it was a huge improvement on the T1 and could have probably been very useful to Umbrella in case it survived. The clone of the T2 that was evacuated from the Arclay lab was used heavily in the development of later Tyrants, so in a way, it did pave the way for future models. T11, TALOS. The Tyrant Armored Lethal Organic System was biologically engineered by the Umbrella Corporation to become the ultimate bioweapon. It was a computer-controlled assault armor that was grafted onto the body of the T11 Tyrant, and it came to be known as TALOS. This model was actually a sort of counter by Umbrella's North American branch to the Nemesis-T Type developed by Umbrella Europe. Once the T2 was successfully developed, ticking almost all the boxes that Umbrella wanted from a BOW, the research team found themselves with a marketable humanoid bioweapon. The Tyrant project was moving on smoothly, and so a proposal was made to develop a new and highly advanced bioweapon that would be able to overcome the one major flaw of the existing Tyrants, the lack of control. As mentioned earlier, the nature of the T-virus was such that even after painstaking research and creating new strains, the Tyrants could still undergo sudden cellular mutation, which could result in a low or complete lack of functionality, as well as impairment of judgment, among other faulty results. Hence, a more stable version was necessary to ensure safe deployment and adequate efficiency. The 6th research lab of Umbrella in Europe had already managed to find a way to bypass the issues using an organic parasite. Their Nemesis project was set to be completed and deployed in Raccoon City shortly. The team at Arclay found a much better solution using chip connections to brain cells, which allowed all bioweapons to be remotely controlled by a supercomputer such as the Red Queen. While this was certainly a fantastic improvement, Arclay was not yet satisfied and wanted the bioweapon to be able to match the firepower of very heavy military hardware. While normal Tyrants were obviously way more powerful than even the best trained human troops and had better survivability, their ability was limited to handling only one military division at a time. Armored fighting vehicles or military-grade helicopters could significantly affect the ability of a Tyrant to engage and kill. Therefore, there was need to create one with specialized combat firepower and armor. Most Tyrants were not compatible with heavy weapons as they would hinder their motor skills and reflexes. By using enhanced armor modules and internal reinforcement implants, along with long-distance homing weaponry, the natural abilities of the Tyrant would be preserved, in addition to granting it amazing firepower. After intensive research, the TALOS was formed. This model was to become the ultimate and most advanced bioweapon, but before its completion, the development was halted as a result of a T-virus outbreak, courtesy of former Umbrella researcher James Marcus. Umbrella founder Oswell E. Spencer realized that the mansion facility of the organization would not stand for long and commanded his trusted enforcer, Sergei Vladimir, to recover the TALOS, which was formerly called the T-11, so that the research wouldn't die. Sergei was successful in only recovering the prototype, and it was secured and brought back to Umbrella before the mansion was destroyed. Once the outbreak happened in Raccoon City, Umbrella was forced underground and most of its operations were halted. The TALOS project was then shifted to the Russian branch of the corporation after being recovered from the nest during the outbreak. This was also Umbrella's last surviving stronghold. It was there that Sergei oversaw the subsequent development, and the TALOS Tyrant was completed and tested against a Special Forces unit, an attack helicopter, as well as 2 armored vehicles. The new model performed splendidly, and the rumors about a new ultimate bioweapon from Umbrella started to spread. TALOS actually used the T-11 Tyrant as a base and added remote computer control abilities through a chip implanted in its brain. It had a very advanced cardiovascular system which granted it mobility that could not be conceived in any other living organism. The body armor was made of a special metal alloy which not only served as a defense against bodily damage from missiles and projectile fire, but also curbed unwanted mutations by the T-virus. A homing MRL weapon system allowed it to respond to faraway targets. It had a massive left arm that could easily sideswipe and/or crush opponents, while the rocket launcher it was equipped with had a rate of fire similar to that of a submachine gun. Despite being humanoid, it had enough firepower to hold its own against a tank. The Russian stronghold of Umbrella was attacked by Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield, former STARS members, on February 18, 2003. They managed to break into the facility and came across a horde of zombies, but were able to overpower them. Upon descending deeper into the facility, they entered a large chamber where they could hear Sergei's voice on a speaker. He boasted about the prowess of the TALOS model and finally activated it, forcing Jill and Chris to fend for themselves. The Tyrant was armed with a massive rocket launcher and launched heavy fire at the pair, but it was defeated. There was little respite, however, because only seconds later it mutated into a much larger and more powerful form with claws and tentacles. While this form did not feature armor and long-range weapons, it was physically more powerful and enormous, granting it an advantage in close combat. After a heavy fight, Jill and Chris managed to find the Tyrant's weak spot on its back and shot it, killing it once more. They were able to escape the stronghold before the self-destruct sequence could be initiated. Albert Wesker, on the other hand, personally confronted Sergei and the Red Queen controlling the TALOS and killed the former, capturing the computer. The destruction of the TALOS model and the annihilation of the Russian facility, coupled with Sergei's death and the Red Queen's capture, effectively marked the end of Umbrella. The corporation had spent an ungodly amount of money on the research and development of the Tyrants, and ultimately, at the end, the research died. Did you know that the Nemesis-T Type and most other specialized Tyrants, like the TALOS, also derived their names from Greek mythology? Talos was a giant made from bronze who was sent by Zeus to protect Europa, a noblewoman. Nemesis, meanwhile, was the Greek goddess of divine retribution, and her name means righteous wrath or just indignation. Bandersnatch. This was actually developed as an offshoot of the actual Tyrant Project, mainly for practical purposes. This was done because the people with the right genetic makeup who could be turned into successful tyrants were far less in number, and even then, developing a tyrant was extremely expensive. Thus, the Bandersnatch developed as a more pocket-friendly alternative, but it was exactly because of this reason that it wasn't really successful. Parts of their body would degrade within seconds of their creation, and oddly enough, this would happen mainly to their left arms. In December 1998, many of these models were being stored at the Rockford Island Military Training Center to get data about combat-trained anti-BOW soldiers. During an HCF raid on the island, there was an outbreak of the T-virus, which led to the models witnessing active combat. The attack was led by Albert Wesker, who got his hands on the Bandersnatch research data for future experimentation, which led to the creation of the Jabberwock S3. Interestingly, the name of this model is inspired in part by Lewis Carroll's poems The Hunting of the Snark and Jabberwocky. Hypnos T Type. The Sheena Island Tyrant plant produced an experimental model called Hypnos T Type, and you're probably guessing right, it was named after the Greek god of sleep. Commander Vincent Goldman pioneered this model as a eugenicist and fierce supporter of umbrella supremacy. The main difference between this and all the other Tyrant models was that this one had in its genetic makeup the Hypnos gene, which, when implanted in an organism, would kill off weak cells through natural selection and keep only the strongest cells alive. This would make the organism evolve continuously through the reproduction of only superior cells. This process was repeated over 100,000 times for 3 weeks. A neurotransmitter called beta-hetero-non-serotonin was also required to create the Hypnos T-type, as it gave the model much more ferocity. Once the Tyrant was activated, in the game, it would kill Andy Holland, UT Commander, or Vincent Goldman, depending on the ending that the player got. It would get knocked unconscious briefly, but would continue to mutate. As a result, it would get more muscle mass, larger claws, sharper teeth, and a huge jaw. It would mutate again after another encounter with Ark Thompson, but would finally die after 2 missiles were launched into its abdomen. Thanatos. Named after the Greek god of death, the Thanatos Tyrant was a unique model created by Dr. Greg Muller, who built upon the research data from the T-103 model. He wanted a Tyrant specifically made to kill and preferred the physical size of the T-2 combat model. Greg allied himself with Peter Jenkins at Raccoon University after offering to help him create an antidote for the T-virus. T-blood, or blood from a creature infected with said virus, was the bargaining chip that Greg would give to Peter to create the vaccine, and he intended to get this blood from Thanatos. However, Peter came to know that Greg was offering to help only for a personal vendetta and would actively use the cure as leverage against Umbrella and refused to collaborate. Hence, the blood from Thanatos wasn't needed anymore, but the Tyrant wouldn't remain dormant. As a part of Operation Emperor's Mushroom, an Umbrella biohazard countermeasure service was sent by the corporation to enter Raccoon University and retrieve the Tyrant, or kill it, and retrieve only the remains in case it was too strong. Greg was well aware of Umbrella's intent and released Thanatos to wipe out the team sent to hunt it down. Upon coming across it, the team opened fire to take it down, but couldn't, so Nikolai Zinovev collected T-blood from it, which was Plan B. However, this caused Thanatos to go into a homicidal rampage, killing many mercenaries and taking one body back to Greg for research. Nikolai started preparing for another possible encounter. After this, Thanatos pursued a group of refugees throughout the university but failed to kill them. In fact, some of them were able to momentarily knock the Tyrant out using electric shock and took the T-blood with them. Nikolai killed Greg, and this activated the C4 charges around the place. The explosion destroyed a big part of the building and brought the ceiling down on Thanatos, causing it to lose an arm and a leg. It then mutated into its super tyrant form, Thanatos R. It resumed chasing down the survivors outside the university and finally confronted them. While it could have taken them down, they were unnaturally resilient. Using a firearm or the daylight antigen, a vaccine to the T-virus made with Thanatos' blood, the survivors were able to defeat it and escape the city. However, considering that the antigen was made from Thanatos' own blood, it was possible for the Tyrant to combat its effects.
Shit, that's a T-103 got its power limit.
What is the T-103 and its variants? Let's now discuss the variants of the T-103, which was the first mass-produced Tyrant with over a dozen clones. T-103. This guy was produced from modified clones of the T-2 and was the posthumous completion of the goal of the Tyrant Project. It possessed intelligence like normal humans and could carry out orders far more effectively than previous models. T-103 models were used as bodyguards and sent for specialized missions. The reason for its development code being 103 instead of just 003 was probably to separate it from its predecessors, as it was a true mass-produced Tyrant in comparison to the ones before it, which were mainly just prototypes. Dr. William Burke American evacuated an embryonic clone of the T2 model from the Arclay lab, and developments focusing on improving it further began in Umbrella's underground facility beneath Raccoon City. The reason was to overcome the fatal flaw of the T2, which caused it to go out of human control and gain a sense of self after being isolated for months. After it was completed, the T-13 started being produced en masse at the Sheena Island plant, and several experimental variants were developed as well. The T-103 Tyrant was used for the first time in a live combat situation in July 1998 when Colonel Sergei Vladimir and his customized Ivan T-103 bodyguard entered the Raccoon Forest. One model also fought with Albert Wesker in the Executive Training School's rail yard and helped Sergei escape the attack of escaped BOWs after getting hold of the T-11 test subject at the Arclay lab. The Raccoon City destruction incident saw several T-103 models deployed. Sergei ordered an air shipment of 6 Tyrants for 2 different missions. One T-103 was ordered to recover the sample of G-virus from Sherry Birkin's pendant and eliminate any survivors in the Raccoon police station. The other 5 T-103s were ordered to kill Delta Force intruders near the incineration disposal plant P-12A. All of these models were killed during their missions. Sheena Island's commander, Vincent Goldman, released many T-103 models to kill Ark Thompson in November 1998. While this model was eventually discontinued, its framework provided invaluable insight regarding the design and development of future bioweapons. In 2011, many models of this Tyrant were modified and improved to be used in the Eastern Slav Republic's civil war. 3 of them were dispatched and then encountered by Leon Scott Kennedy and Alexander Kozachenko. One of these 3 ended up getting killed by the pair, and the other 2 were eliminated using aircraft fire as part of a joint US-Russian invasion of the region, even though they were in their Super Tyrant form. T-78. Cloned from the T-103 model, the T-78 Tyrant didn't have a limiter code. This was done to test the effects of using a T-103 without said device. As a result, the T-78 had blunt claws which weren't always present in the other mass-produced models. This Tyrant was transported to Rockford Island from the Antarctic Transport Terminal in a mission that was supervised by Agent Hunk of the Umbrella Security Service, as ordered by the island base commander, Alfred Ashford. The power limiter of the T-78 was disabled, which could have either been due to Ashford's orders or the intention of its creators. This allowed the Tyrant to experience mutations. When the HCF attacked the island, Ashford unleashed the T-78 to kill Steve Burnside and Claire Redfield, who were trying to escape. Although it was seemingly defeated, it still managed to hold onto the plane and escape while most of the base was destroyed in a series of explosions. The right hand of the T-78 mutated further and resulted in extended claws. It was sent down into the ocean when Claire released a cargo crate from its safety harness towards the Tyrant. In the Dark Side Chronicles, it was killed using a missile let loose by Claire and Steve. Tyrant 91. Another experimental model derived from the T-103 Tyrant was the first attempt where a Tyrant was being engineered using the T+G virus. However, it was considered to be a failure since it failed to produce an electric current, which was typical of the T+G virus. The T-91 also had an exposed heart sticking out of its back, which made it far more vulnerable to physical attacks. Unlike most other models, this one had grown tentacles instead of arms with claws. After it was activated, Bruce McGivern was soon able to subdue it. Nemesis-T Type. Created by Umbrella Europe's No. 6 laboratory, this Tyrant represented the success of the Nemesis Project with the successful implementation of the NE-alpha parasites within the hosts of T-103 models, ultimately resulting in a very intelligent and powerful creature. While several models were produced, only one experienced combat when it was sent to Raccoon City. It was nicknamed the Pursuer. Umbrella wanted to create an ideal bioweapon for the US Army and then fund its own eugenics program. With the T-Virus project, almost all the results showed subpar intelligence, which meant that the BOWs could not be used and controlled effectively in battle. The Hunter project was somewhat promising, but the intelligence of the clones was limited to understanding only 10 commands. Thus, to become military grade, the bioweapons would need to become as close to the human level as possible in terms of intelligence. Umbrella USA and Umbrella Europe were racing for this result, and the Arclay Laboratories set up the Tyrant Project. The No. 6 laboratory started the Nemesis Project to create parasitic organisms that would take over the brain functions in a BOW host and allow it to be controlled better. Both projects faced several roadblocks, and the Nemesis Project found no host that could survive the process. However, by 1998, Umbrella USA was trailing ahead after creating the T2 and the T103, both of which were extremely promising. Nevertheless, they were still subdued by RPD's STARS unit. Umbrella Europe started the Nemesis Project again and asked for several T103 clones to be used as test subjects. The NE alpha parasites planted in their bodies and successfully hijacked brain function without killing the host Tyrant. However, while this was a significant outcome, two of the models tried to escape from the lab by demonstrating unwarranted eye awareness and ego. When the T-virus outbreak happened in Raccoon City, Umbrella Europe started shipping bioweapons to take advantage of the situation. Monitors across the city would record the combat skills of the Tyrants to verify how reliable they would be as military products. Nemesis-T was given orders to hunt down and kill all STARS members, and it was also shown photographs of each of them to commit to memory. It was sent to the city and equipped with very heavy weaponry, including a rocket launcher. By the time it arrived, only Jill Valentine and Brad Vickers were left from the STARS unit. It tracked Vickers, who was able to alert Jill but didn't die. It's possible that the Tyrant lost track of him, or he mutated and became a zombie. It then turned its attention to Jill and covertly observed her make contact with numerous UBCS mercenaries, including Nikolai Zinovel. He was tasked with evaluating the progress of the Tyrant and faked his death later. The pursuer confronted Jill later in the night but was unable to kill her. Captain Mikhail Victor severely wounded it in a suicide bombing, and the secretions of the parasite within led to mutations as a form of recovery. There are different accounts about the pursuer's actions following this, but it was primarily engaged with finding Jill and killing her, which it did not succeed in. However, it was able to infect her with a strain of the T-virus. Two accounts say that it followed Jill to incineration disposal plant P12A, and while fighting her, it was exposed to highly corrosive chemicals which destroyed it. The parasite that survived then mutated out of control and dragged the remains of the host outside, where it was either mortally wounded or succumbed to its injuries, or was shot repeatedly by Jill. Another account says that it tracked Jill to Nest 2, a BOW testing facility below Spencer Memorial Hospital, and killed Tyrell Patrick. Then, it fought with Jill at the treatment plant of the facility, where it was exposed to corrosive chemicals. After the Tyrant died, the parasite mutated itself into an enormous blob and was finally killed by Jill using an experimental Umbrella railgun. Tyrant R. T400 TP was an experimental variant of the T103 Tyrant stored in the Umbrella R&D facility at Raccoon City. Before the destruction of the city, hunters were being created in large numbers to counter the Tyrant in strength tests, and they escaped after the outbreak while it was still not activated. Umbrella scientist Carter activated it to fight with the renegade Hunter Rs, which were running wild in the facility. Before the survivors could escape, Tyrant R demonstrated self-awareness by destroying the AT-1525 sample and knocking off the detonator for its internal bomb. Carter and David King reprogrammed the Tyrant, who then killed the former and went to hunt down other survivors. It chased David and Linda Baldwin through the ruined city while mutating into a more powerful form. Nyx grabbed hold and absorbed it into its body, and when David destroyed Nyx, Tyrant R was freed, demonstrating its vitality and regenerative ability. It then confronted Ada Wong, who called it clever but predictable, and was able to defeat it after a difficult battle. Finally, when missiles rained over Raccoon City, its body was destroyed. Ivan. Ivan was engineered from the T-103 Tyrant to serve as the personal bodyguard of Colonel Sergei Vladimir. One Ivan Tyrant was used to kill Albert Wesker in the Umbrella Executive Training School as per Sergei's orders for Albert's failure and disobedience. During this fight, an explosion distracted Ivan and Wesker escaped. Later, Ivan was seen attacking a pack of Cerberus and carrying an unconscious Talos with Sergei next to it. In 2003, both Ivans were ordered by Sergei to finally kill Albert for his intrusion and his betrayal of the Caucasus facility. They were, however, no match for his superhuman abilities and were both killed by Wesker. Like the T-103 Tyrant, the Ivan Tyrants wore a protective coat with black gloves and boots. The color scheme was different since the Ivans wore white coats with white boots having black shoelaces, whereas the T-103 wore green. The Ivans also wore wraparound sunglasses with a mounted display. Their basic combat abilities were quite similar to the T-103 model, but they were modified further to allow assimilation into human society. A major improvement of the Ivan model was the understanding of human language and the ability to pass as human, in addition to being able to use very complicated firearms. However, since it was derived from the T-103 anyways, it could still transform into a super tyrant after being severely damaged. Tyrant C. Not much is known about the Tyrant C, except that it was a modification of the T-103 model and was seen in action in Raccoon City during the 1998 Raccoon City destruction incident. This Tyrant had a horn on its head, but it's not clear whether this was a result of a mutation or a deliberate feature. Unidentified Tyrant series. These were encountered by U.S. federal agent Leon S. Kennedy in the Eastern Slav Republic in 2011 during a civil war. While 3 were acquired and used by Svetlana Belikova, there seemed to be more models in the series, as the 3 were numbered 008, 013, and 016. They were released from the storage capsules below the presidential palace under her orders. This was done because there was proof that, along with Leon, spy Ada Wong and Alexander Kozachenko, leader of the secessionists, had infiltrated the facility and wanted to destroy Svetlana's plans. Alexander used the dominant species Plaga to control and use the Plaga-hosting lickers and destroy her security personnel. She activated 2 of the Tyrants to stop him. The lickers were useless against them, and Leon and Alexander agreed to help each other. They escaped the 2 Tyrants and then came across the 3rd. This one was tricked by Alexander into attacking a licker and then set aflame when he fired at an oil tanker, causing it to explode. However, the Tyrant survived, and with its power limiter damaged from the explosion, it mutated into a super Tyrant. Leon and Alexander both tried to stop it, and the former even used a tank in the process. Initially, it proved too tough, resulting in a stalemate. Finally, they were able to decapitate it and crush its body under the tank. The victory was short-lived, however, as the other 2 Tyrants showed up, having mutated into super Tyrants as well. Aircraft arrived just in time and killed both of them as a joint USA-Russian alliance invaded the country. These Tyrants were very similar to the T-103 models, which were designed almost 13 years prior, except that the former was much taller. Moreover, their super Tyrant forms did not have clearly exposed hearts, unlike others. They also produced only 1 mutated claw as opposed to 2, which gave them considerable dexterity unseen in previous super Tyrants. In their normal Tyrant form, they could easily kill lickers, who could not damage them in any way despite their overwhelming numbers. Marvelous verdict! The Tyrant Project was undeniably a very ambitious plan from Umbrella, and while it didn't ultimately produce the results the corporation was hoping for, and actually played a vital role in bringing about Umbrella's inevitable demise, the innovations made as a part of the project were previously unheard of, unimaginable even. In the quest to develop the ultimate bioweapon, a number of Tyrant models were created and tested in different scenarios. The project didn't get very early success and had to wait until the Epsilon strain was engineered, and even then it was a series of trial and error that finally got Umbrella its first working Tyrant, designated T-002. The TALOS and Nemesis-T Type were probably the most promising Tyrants, and as such, they did go to far greater lengths than most other models. However, the inherent contradiction with bioweapons is that they can always be defeated one way or another, and Umbrella eventually was wiped away before it could make its BOW technology completely infallible. Do you think it was possible to create another Tyrant that could have been what Umbrella wanted all along? If so, what do you think they should or should not have done differently? Let us know in the comments down below, and as always, stay tuned for more marvelous content.